Rudraksha. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Hi, Emma. It's nice to see you in a slightly different guise than usual,
Yeah.
but I'm doing well and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about you?
My name is Rudraksha Mitra. I'm from New Delhi, India, and my background is in sports. I used to be a competitive tennis player for about the last 10 years, and I've played nationally, internationally, at the Asian level, and that's basically been my realm of operation for most of my life. And through sports is where I have found sort of my footing in life. And it's also been the vessel through which I've figured everything out. And incidentally, it is via sport that I found my way to the sustainable development spaces as well. My life has very much been synonymous with sport so far.
And how did you make that journey or that link between sport and professional tennis playing and sustainability?
This process was very interesting. I mean, I come from a family of civil servants and social workers. My mother was a very prolific social worker back in India, and my father was also in the administration, the Indian government's administration. So um, there was always a backdrop of, you know, more people-focused things. But at the same time, it's not something that interested
Mm.
me in the least. I was very into my sporting career and sort of journey. And within that, obviously, you get to interact with people from many different spaces. You get to live a very unique kind of life, especially when you play in, uh, we don't have a sporting culture here in India. So it's not exactly as glamorous as you'd expect. There's a lot of stuff at the grassroots level, and there's a lot of people from so many different walks of life. There are people who are from so many different economical and social backgrounds. So you get exposed to a lot of people. So even if you're not actively cultivating it, you get an eye for these sorts of things. And then when something close to you eventually sparks your interest in 2021, early in 2021, I got a diagnosis for ADHD, which is attention deficiency hyperactivity disorder. It's a
Mm.
neurodevelopmental disorder. And I was undiagnosed for 10 years, which wreaked havoc upon my personal, professional, academic life. Everything had been affected by it. And so it was like starting a new inning, so to say. And within that, um, initially I took it really well. I thought, okay, now I know what my challenges are and where they lie. And I went back onto the tennis court and I started playing tournaments. And in one of the tournaments, I had a panic attack. It was not a new situation for me to be overwhelmed, but it's the first time I attributed not so much to my own nerves or to the situation as I did to, oh, this is the condition that I have. And then I went to look for, resources for ADHD athletes because I assumed that,
Mm.
um, there would be more athletes out there with ADHD who would be facing similar challenges. And I felt like while my coaches and my fellow players were empathetic, they couldn't fully relate or understand what I was talking about because it's not something that they understood. Even I found that there's actually absolutely nothing for athletes out there with ADHD. There's very little. And then initially I was like, oh, is it because people with the neurodivergences are handling things better? It's just me. But upon, perusing it a little further, I got involved with a few sport plus social impact communities. I tried to interact with ADHD athletes and I tried to interact with mental health experts. And I guess that there's actually not much for us anyway. People aren't talking about it. And that's kind of where my journey into the social impact sphere began with a very simple idea of, hey, if I involve more neurodivergent athletes in the conversation, maybe someone will figure out how to deal with these challenges, and that will help me win more matches. So it came from a very selfish place, so to say. But then getting involved in these spaces exposed me to so much more, and that's how my journey to this year began.
Thanks for sharing that, the journey that you've had through that from tennis. Do you think, thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, do you think ADHD or disability is factored into them enough? Or is there different ways that we can be talking about sustainability in a different way and maybe a less neurotypical lens?
I personally think the concept of neurodivergence isn't factored in enough in anything. We live the world through a very neurotypical lens. And even if you look at
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis for something like ADHD, it is done entirely on neurotypical terms. The way that we evaluate it is done entirely on the basis of how it differs from neurotypical life. And all the spaces around us, including everything from school to workplaces to even institutions like sport, cater exclusively to neurotypical ideas. That's the thing that I found, which is conventional performance training. When I was exploring my options in sport and the options that I had to train or the options that I had to cultivate my game or my mentality, there was nothing that catered to it. So it's all about you fitting into the box that's
Mm-hmm.
already put there. All the manifestations of ADHD are labeled as, deviant behaviors instead of, people who just have a different way of experiencing the world. At its core, I don't believe that neurodivergence is a crutch of any sort. It's a crutch within the context of a very neurotypical world. And therein lies the challenge. And then we don't spare any thought, let alone enough thought for these issues. And, they factor in, like, when we talk about the SDGs, for instance, we obviously have diversity and inclusion and reduced inequality. How often do these conversations or the efforts that are made around them involve inclusivity for neurodivergent folks? And inclusivity doesn't mean bundling us into a box. It means creating the
Mm-hmm.
space for us. But the problem that presents itself here is that we are trying to fit people like me into a specific box instead of trying to make the world a little bigger so that it can accommodate our ways of being. And the big detriment and the big drawback to this is we miss out on a lot of potential and we miss out on, so many unique perspectives just because, we are trying to get people to conform to this one way of being. We're not exploring all the other ways in which people can do things and operate and innovate. The one
Yeah.
big thing that always stands out in conversations about ADHD is, it's a big strength. That's kind of how it's portrayed. The creativity is our big strength. We are more capable of creative thought because we can take patterns, that other people aren't seeing, and we have more ambiguous way of looking at things. But how often are we given the space to cultivate this innovation? My teachers in school, I would study in my own way, I
Mm-hmm.
would understand the world in my own way. And the thing that I faced a lot was, you're doing well because I would do well. Objectively, I was successful. I would do well, but the thing that I was always told is you're
Yeah.
doing well. If you did it the correct way, you would do even better. Now, the correct way is the neurotypical way. When I tried to do it the
Mm-hmm.
neurotypical way, it, it didn't work. And I always felt like I was doing something wrong, which made it extremely hard to take, any positives from anything I was doing because it always felt like there was something I had foregone in the way that I'd done it or that I wasn't doing enough. That was a very important concept for, to realize that I had to sort of lean into what I had rather than abandon it. And
Yeah.
that's what I'd like to see more of in the world as a whole, which is people leaning more into the idea of neurodivergence. And instead of trying to fit
Yeah.
them into, like, to look at the inclusivity instead of as, hey, let's fit these people into the world, instead to make the world a little bigger, so to say. Because, what we need to
Mm-hmm.
do is create space for different ways of being.
I love that,
What
the
we need
way
to
that you
focus
say
on.
it about making the world a bit bigger. And from your perspective as well, coming from tennis, but then working in sort of offices and other workplaces, is there ways that you think work should change in the future that would make it more inclusive in your point of view?
I definitely think so. I think just everything could stand to be a little less rigid. ADHD is very ambiguous. It fits different people in different ways. There is no one way of having ADHD, you know? There are
Mhm.
commonalities, yes, uh,
Yeah.
but it's not the same for everyone. It manifests so differently across disciplines. Like, it'll look differently for me in sports, and it'll look differently for someone who's working in a corporate landscape. It'll look differently for someone who's um, a student and someone who's a musician. So we need to make a little bit of space for that
Mhm.
ambiguity because we are missing out on so much potential. Current notions of aptitude are built are actually antithetical to neurodivergent folks flourishing. And the one thing to really pay attention to when we're talking about something like ADHD is the better I fit into a neurotypical box, the worse I'll actually feel. So if I'm
Yeah.
adapting into this box that you've given me, like if I am adapting to, the more conventional work expectations of sitting at a desk for 8, 9, 10 hours or, just being dialed in every single day all the time. What that's doing for me, even if I'm doing well at it, is that it's burning me out and it's making me unhappier. And the one big issue for
Mhm.
us is the more we do, the more we make an effort to adjust, the less yielding the world at large becomes to us. Because they feel like, oh, they're better now or they're
Mm.
fixed now, which is not the case. Actually, the more we're adjusting, the more support we need. But it's looked at the other way around. And that's something to change. And
Mm.
I think, it's very difficult to say exactly what will benefit neurodivergent folks. There are things to do, but the first thing to do is open up the conversation, which is what might help, you know, and to actually think like what might
Yeah.
a neurodivergent person in the workplace experience? What might someone with ADHD experience in the workplace? Because right now we don't even have space for the conversation to be open, you know, and in a lot of cases,
Mm.
we talk about disabilities. In a lot of cases, some things that are expected out of us are actually impossible. And what I see a lot these days is it's just people at large. Why talk strictly about employees? People at large are becoming okay with labels like ADHD, but they're not okay with the manifestations of it. When I talk about ADHD, when I talk about neurodivergency, people are very supportive. They're very
Yeah.
facilitating. They're very sympathetic. I get a lot of pats on the back. I get a lot of support. But then when I present those symptoms or when I talk about my challenges, instead of putting it as, hey, this is what ADHD does, when I talk about what challenges I face as a human being, people are not that open to it. There's a lot of correcting, which is not what we need. What we
Mhm.
need more is like more space creation, not correcting. And where we miss out in this respect is that an ADHD person, we already have rejection sensitivity, which means we're already sensitive to rejection. And along with that, on average, an ADHD
Mhm.
person is likely to receive 10,000 more negative remarks as compared to a neurotypical person by the age of 10, according to a study that was conducted. And we're already facing a lot more negative connotations
Mhm.
because the very way that we function is being corrected at all times. So we automatically believe that our way of being is wrong. That's the biggest thing that I struggled with in my life, which is that, the way I'm
Mhm.
doing things isn't wrong and I have to kind of accept the way I am and sort of, that's why I always say being diagnosed stripped me of my denial. Because for many years, I felt like, I was not at ease with myself and I was very unhappy, even though I was doing really well in things. And I felt like if I could just pretend to be quote unquote normal, I would get that sort of peace that I wanted. And then as soon as I got diagnosed, I realized, hey, there is no being normal. There's only this. And then I had to learn to lean into it, which is exceptionally difficult as a journey. You know, even trainers that I have worked with have been very one-dimensional in the way that they have gone about things. It's very neurotypical focus. And within this, what we do is we eliminate a lot of the strength that could present themselves. And we really put like a big full stop to how
Mhm.
much neurodivergent people think is possible for them. I feel like every single thing I do it wrong because that's what I've been told that you're not doing it the right way. You're not doing it the right way. You're not doing it the right way. That's why for a lot of people who get freshly diagnosed, it's very emotional and it's extremely challenging because for the first time you feel like, hey, I'm not broken,
Yeah.
and it explains everything. But I feel like the focus needs to get away from trying to fix the way that we present itself and explore more ways of being. And I think that applies to inclusivity at large pertaining to anything, which is instead of trying to help people fit into the existing system, why can't we expand the system to fit in more people? I think that applies to conversations around inclusivity at large, and it's especially important within the case of something like neurodivergence.
And do you have any resources? I know we've talked about some before for people that want to learn more about ADHD or maybe how to open up the conversations between people and learn a bit more about it.
The resource that I benefited from the most was something called How to ADHD. It's a YouTube channel. One of the reasons that it works really well is because it caters to the ADHD case. The videos are very short and they're designed in a way that keep sort of our brain stimulated because the people who look up ADHD, the thing that is most difficult for us is this like stay on task. And that doesn't mean that we can't focus. We need stimulation to focus. We have something called hyperfocus. To find something interesting, we're going to be extremely focused. So, how to ADHD is something I really enjoy. I do feel like there is a bit of a difference between most ADHD resources available on the internet or at large, or most information available about ADHD and actual lived experience. I think that's improving. There are a lot more ADHD communities that are coming up. So in my opinion, the best way to learn about ADHD is to actually go and speak to someone with ADHD. I think that is the most important thing because the way that it's reported often does not do justice to the way that it's lived. So, you know, the best way to learn about this is to go through more relatable sort of sources and to talk to people who actually have it and then supplement it with, you know, the information that is available. We need to broaden our lens when it comes to it. And, instead of sticking to like, if you look up, I'll tell you, people have difficulty focusing. Nobody ever attributed it to me because they said, hey, this guy is always focused on what he's doing. The key there was I was stimulated what I was doing. I was on court. I was really into it. I could not focus on anything at all outside of it. And those are distinctions that get lost in the cracks unless you take a more holistic view of it. Find someone with ADHD, talk a little bit with them, add to the conversation if you can, because we need right now a lot more conversation.
Thank you so much, Rudraksha, for joining me. And we'll share the links that Rudraksha mentioned for anyone wanting to look up more.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.